You will either be leaving yourself and be drawn out from the self as a magnet towards the objective world, to the object on the outside, or you will be the magnet, and where everything that you see that is outside of you, the attention you will give it is when it relates to the self. Then you will draw it to you.
Slowly kisses passing by the river.
Hey everyone, welcome back. I am Alexa Summers, your host, and this is my channel, Reflective Personality. It's good to be back. So, I'd like to make a recap of last week's lesson or discussion, and I was referring to Carl Jung's book, Psychological Types, which I am trying to read right now, and I'm learning about what he called the two general attitudes, which are the two types. And I talked about those last time. So it's the extroversion type and the introversion type. And you could say that the whole world is actually divided in these two halves. And I compared it to the board, the objective personality code that we use, that my channel is talking about. And we know that on this board, there are in total 512 types. So what you do is that when you type someone, you have to start with determining whether the person is on the extroverted side or on the introverted side. So you have to cut the board in halves. So that is one of the most important coins. If you get that one off, then you will be pretty off with the whole type. So that's really, really important to understand. And how can you tell if someone is extroverted or introverted? Well, it's not that easy, to be honest. But what I can tell you from reading Carl Jung so far is that the extroverted type is drawn to the outside. So the outside world, or what Carl Jung calls the object, is like a magnet, you could say. And it's drawing the self, so the extroverted decider. So from this person, the self or the identity will be drawn out to the outside world. So you will basically define yourself depending on the context that you are in, the people you are with, the whole situation, the whole circumstances of your life at this moment. That is you. Basically, this is what Carl Jung says. And the other part, when you are the introversion type, which I am not, is when you are the magnet. So the subject, the self, the person, the self, will draw the outside world towards themselves. So this is the lens that they are using. So when they are scanning on the outside, they are looking for objects or realities that match themselves. So they are defining, you could say, the world subjectively, as we all do, by looking at it through their own self. And we, as extroverted deciders, we are looking at ourself through the lens of the world. And of course, neither of these two perspectives are complete. However, that's just how it works. So that is basically what he's talking about, that you have one of these two filters, the general attitudes. And of course, you could be doing both. That is not a contradiction, but you will lean on one side or the other. So one will be slightly or a lot stronger, depending on where you are on the board on this spectrum. Okay. What he also said, so today it's a lot of repetition because these things are so important to remember and to understand. So what he also said is that the subjective mind that we all have, whether we are DE or DI, we are subjective. So our filter will either be the self, or so seeing the world through the eyes of the self, or seeing the self through the eyes of the outside world, whatever context we're living in. So we will always be clouded in our judgment of ourselves and the world. What Carl Jung said is that our mind tricks us because it doesn't want to be too one-sided. So say you are a DE at the top, what it is wanting to be is a DI, but that is like 4 steps down. So that's hard. But they kind of construct this secondary type, or that is what Jung said, and this is true with all the types, of course. So the secondary type that the mind creates in order to balance itself out, it's a trick. And that makes it so hard for us to see ourselves. And what Carl Jung said is that our perception of ourselves are clouded. So we can't see ourselves. And naturally, because the mind is tricking us this way, we almost should type ourselves upside down, because it just shows that your mind is working just fine, because this is the natural way it functions, just to keep some kind of balance on the inside. However, on the outside, you will be perceived as the type that you are. So you can just trick your own self, but your functions will shine through to the people around you, and they won't be tricked the same way you will. And that is why it's so good to get typed, and or to just triangulate who you are, your personality traits, your functions, with a close family member, with close friends, and not just 1 or 2, but like maybe 10 or more. And if you start to hear the same message, because hopefully at least half or more than half of the people you're asking will be relatively honest. They won't just flatter you. So when you're starting to hear like a trend, then you're probably getting very close to who you really are. So this is just a natural thing. We are typing ourselves upside down, and it's normal. It's completely normal. And when we finally see ourselves more clearly, that is when we are starting to see the world and the people around us a little bit more objectively than we did before, since we are using this filter. And if we know that we use the filter, because we will use it just as much after being typed, just as much after knowing our type. So that is not the thing. The filter won't fall off. I won't become someone else just because I understood my functions. But I will be well aware of my filter. And when I know the filter, then I can make some adjustments in my view of the things I see. What really is so interesting is that the distribution of the types, so the extroverted or the introverted types, are, as Carl Jung said, is apparently random. So, as probably most parents have noticed, if they have more than one child, one child can be introverted, the other can be extroverted. They can be very, very different, even though they are from the same parents. And so Jung concluded that the contrast of types, therefore, as a universal psychological phenomenon, must in some way or other have its biological precursor. So already 100 years ago, Carl Jung said that the types are in our genes. And today, when we actually, with technology, are able to study our genes more and more, and also with the neuroscience, we are able to scan brains and see patterns, we will, in a relatively near future, be able to see the parts in our genes. This was a work of 20 years that he summed up in the book Psychological Types. So it was his conclusions of all the observations, clinical observations he'd been doing for 20 years. And you could say that clearly this guy, Carl Jung, has, or at least I think so when I read the book, his TI shines through. Also his intuition. He's kind of overview talking is yeah, that would be an understatement. Okay, so that's about it. Have a wonderful Sunday.